One more P2P Talks, folks. So uh, now we're with Gabriel Licina from South Bend, Indiana, United States, where he actually is now. He has been moving around a lot. And today is going to be a very interesting one because how he said in the last P2P Talks with Marcos Ubieta that if I understand, he's with us here at Green Fab Lab. He's already with us here. And going to be a little bit different, as Gabriel said in the last P2P Talks with Marcos Ubieta, because he's very, he said he's a very bubbled, he's in a very bubbled ecosystem, a conversation ecosystem, Gabriel, where his related peers are biohackers or related. It's a very closed source in this sense of conversation. So and in this sense, P2P Talks is about to burst, is about to open new ways of talking, new ways of meeting people that thinks differently from you, has other perspectives, but has in common the commons, has in common the peer-to-peer paradigm, has in common all this complexity that we're all living in, that is now collapsing all the systems that we always lived in. So this is a very, very incredible opportunity to not to respect these boundaries and open new frontiers of conversation. So this is the essence of this proposal of the P2P talk. So with no more further ado, let's get acquainted with Gabriel. Gabriel, please, man, tell to us here where you were born, a little bit of your life, and why did you became a biohacker? So we get a kickstart. We get a good kickstarter here.
All right. Well, so hi, my name's Gabriel, and I was born in the United States, and I was very lucky because I was born to an engineer and a microbiologist, and so I think with everyone there's a things that you get normalized to, and for me that was exploration. I learned how to use a microscope when I was very young. We were always building things and doing ferments, and my parents made their own beer, and all of this stuff seemed very, very normal and is actually not very standard in the United States right now. And so I actually spent maybe, most of my time not doing what I'm doing now, but just exploring. I went to school for something, went to university for something, and then decided that I was wasting my time, and then spent maybe a year just having lots and lots of different jobs. And when I went back to university, I fell in love with biology and chemistry. And so I started working for a laboratory, and it turns out that there are very restrictive environments, which is super important. People like to talk about how science is reductionist, and it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally important to have those tools in your toolkit. It doesn't mean that you have to use them all the time. But having them accessible is important. If you're a carpenter, you have to make a staircase that people can walk on. Otherwise, it doesn't really help anyone. It might be great art, but it's not going to build anything. And I've always been very passionate about doing and building. And when I was in university and working at the labs, there was a lot of doing, but very little follow through. It very rarely goes anywhere. If you knew that the pure amount of research that gets done and then just kind of floats back there ambiently, a lot of it is because people can't make money off of it. But a lot of it is also because we're just like taking tiny little pieces of incremental understanding and stacking them on top of each other. And it's very difficult to try to explain to someone, especially in the modern United States, about the value of research. When they're like, well, so, and then how are you going to make this into a product? You know, what's your return on investment? And this is a very difficult concept that we struggle with here. And so I got very frustrated with this system and decided to go and start my own laboratory. And I took the knowledge that I'd learned and then all of the information that's available on the internet and started to do my own independent projects and to collaborate with other people around the world. At first, it was just for fun, but lately it's kind of gotten a little more serious for me. There's some things that I think are a little more important than others. I have a friend who developed a modification for daisies that when you plant the daisies, if they're planted in soil with heavy metal, they turn blue. And that's an amazing, that's like a very useful and cool hack, you know, because their industry is not always going to tell you what contamination levels are, but if you can go out and you can sprinkle these flowers and you can see in the flower where the contamination is, you know, this helps everyone, because it's not about some paper that only some of us can kind of partially read or some information that is only accessible to other people. It's about making it more open. And so kind of my goal for the last decade has been to increase open access to tools and information, make them more available to everyone. And then what I'm going to be talking about today is actually a very specific project, and it falls under the category of what I'm calling direct action biotechnology, which is probably, well, a mouthful, but also kind of a strange mashup of two concepts, because most of the people who are very pro direct action are usually a little iffy about biotechnology. And I think it's really important that, you know, we start merging these worlds together and finding common ground where we can build things. So yeah, that's my.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you see, I know some biohackers here in Brazil, not so many, but they are. How can I say to you? They are very specific driven for specific things. You see, it's not something, they don't have this holistic understanding and this driver that we have to make this open, we have to make tools, we have to make bridges, we have to have an open knowledge ecosystem to people to sink in and to hack and to do things like that. And
yeah, well, I mean, part of this is just
stumble in a guy like you. It's a very, very, very interesting thing.
Yeah, well, a lot of it has to do with like the narrative of individualism, which is closely tied with the STEM fields, you know, and this, and I mean, heck, even when we talk about removing plastic, you know, it's turned into an individualistic thing. It's like, oh, everybody stop using straws. That'll save the seals. And it's like, I'm just one small person. You know, I might be empowered, but I'm not like change the planet empowered. Not unless there's like a billion of us, you know, and then it's no longer individualism. Then you're working as a group. You have to have more people involved, and community by its very definition requires exclusion. And so you get all of these small communities of biohackers and reforestation people and you know, ecological people and scientists, and you can't say that there's an us, that there's a we, unless there's an other. And I see this comment, 8 billion without straws. 40% of the plastic waste in the ocean is made from fishing nets. So the straws, yay, but fishing nets, way more important. You know, when you're told this narrative about what you can do for the planet, part of that comes from a position where people are trying to make you pay attention to yourself, which feels good. Everybody loves paying attention to themselves. And not paying attention to some of the larger issues. The fishing industry is a much larger creation of waste than even 8 billion people. 8 billion straws, drop in the bucket compared to the fishing industry. You know, and so this is something that we need to recognize. It's like, yeah, it feels good, even 8 billion of us not having straws. But as long as everybody else is still participating in the larger, more complicit systems, it doesn't really matter.
It's going to be nice. You see, I always say this in all the P2P talks. I think that Shannon already knows it, has already heard this. I try not to be a facilitator or a mediator or nothing like that, because it's really about the talk, the P2P talk in between us here. You see, as just put it out, it's okay, but it's going to be nice to people. You can come out and point things that you are not understanding, or a perspective that Gabriel is sharing, but it doesn't resonate with yours, and you have another perspective. But you see, of course, in an empathic way. It's we're talking here. We are united here, or reunited here, in a very, this gathering is a very empathic gathering. So I think that we are here are very open to hear ourselves. So feel free, okay, folks? So let's continue.
Hey, Mike.
I put Mike's microphone out. Okay, let's go.
All right, so I'm going to talk about one very specific project that I've been working on, because it's probably one of the most extreme projects that I'm working on, and it fundamentally encompasses a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to do here. So I think what I can do is...
You can share image, of course.
Yeah, I've got some
May I say
slides.
something before you start, Gabriel?
Absolutely.
This is Carrie Mera. I'm sorry I don't have a cam right now.
That's okay.
I'm an artist. I'm joining from Germany. I was born in Brazil. And I'm here exactly because of what you just stated. You know, I'm interested in how we can flow communication of the type of information that you're bringing to this conversation, for example. I am, while I was in school, I didn't cope with any biology because it just made my whole being tremble. So I didn't pay much attention to biology classes. And chemistry was just, I just got by in biology and chemistry. But I don't think in the age of the internet and at age 55, I'm allowed to keep that kind of position anymore. So I'm here to listen to you, but I'm also here interested to find out how can we use communication to spread the information that you have. So that's my 2 cents that I wanted to add.
And thank you so much for that. This actually reminds me of, hang on a second, I have some cats that are freaking out. Hey Jordan, can you come rescue the cats, please?
Jeremy, very welcome, Jeremy. If you're hearing us, we already started the P2P talk, so feel free to say something about yourself in the chat, and eventually of course you talk with us, okay? Come on, Gabriel.
Yeah, so I was actually just recently, well, it must be 6 months now. I was at a conference called the T3 conference, and it was held down in Mexico, and it changes location every year. And you probably know some of the people. They're all very amazing bioartists. And I was actually the only hard scientist there. And I just use the word hard scientist because it's a delineation, not because it's better or worse. And the thing that I'm going to talk about today is actually the thing that I talked about there as well. And there was such an amazing pushback, and it was so difficult for some people, just because the words that we use are so ingrained in the culture that we participate in, that we start to stop listening to other things. And it was actually a very, very psychically, emotionally difficult experience for me to be in a room with like 200 people that were just like, science is bullshit, man. It's reductionist and useless. And I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that. So I'm going to welcome your feedback, because I think it's very important to push back on these things. And hopefully I'll be able to explain things well enough that it can spark something in you. So I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen. My entire screen. I just want this. Ta-da! Can everybody see that? Is this viewable? Can people see?
I'm viewing.
Okay.
Most people are too.
Okay. Right. So this is the EnTS project, and the Sci-House mentioned on this slide is the 501c3 nonprofit that I work for. We're focused on genetic research and environmental remediation, and making those two things be friends.
Gabriel, just a sec.
Yeah.
Would it be nice if you say some scientific term that is really usual to you to speak on a daily basis, but we have folks all around the place. So if you speak some more scientific term or some biohacking term, it would be nice to make an explanation about it. Okay?
Yes, I will do my very best to do so. I subscribe to the school of thought that you should know your material well enough that you can explain it to someone not in your field after they've had 2 drinks. So hopefully I'll be able to do that as well here. So
I love you, man.
Okay, so this is so the EnTS project, and EnT comes from the Lord of the Rings J.R.R. Tolkien thing, the giant trees that went to war. Originally it was just a joke, but then a friend of mine turned it into an acronym, which means engineered tree systems. But just so you know, it's actually more than just trees. So don't get worried, they just needed to make the letters fit. And so, so this is a combination of 2 things. As I was saying, there needs to be more overlap between like the permaculture community and the environmental science and biotech community. And so one of these is a method for growing forests that's used by the permaculture community. And it works very, very well. It's been established very well. And you've probably seen a picture on Facebook where someone has turned like an old empty lot into a small forest over the course of 1 year. And then the other thing is actually taking technology that was originally used by the sugarcane and the lumber industry and turning that technology into a force for good, as opposed to a force for creating monoculture systems. And so the first thing that I'm talking about is the Miyawaki method. And I think many of you might have heard of this, you just don't maybe know the word, or maybe you do already know the word. And this has to do with a wide variety of species planted very densely with very little management. And this is kind of the tried and true reforestation or afforestation technique that is appreciated in permaculture communities right now. It was established back in 1967 by Miyawaki, and it works really, really well. Some research has also been shown that this isn't just necessarily a forest technique. This can also be used for multiple types of environments. One of the keys here is that we don't want to push the invasive species narrative. We don't want to just go in and smack like 4,000 white pine into an area that never had pine just because it's easy. What we want to do is create these complex ecosystems. And so, for instance, here's a picture. 7 months, you can get trees that are already 3 meters tall. So this is a baseline. This is something that's doable just with permaculture techniques. You can get huge anime-style forests after 15 or 20 years using this technology, because it doesn't just start fast. It continues to grow powerfully and complexly. The whole point is to have a complex series of species as opposed to just one or two things. So the other thing is called, well, it's genetic engineering. And before anyone gets nervous, I'm going to let you know that this particular type of genetic engineering is not about taking something from somewhere else and putting it in another place. This is about upregulation. Now, if you want to go out and you want to build more muscle, you know, you wake up every day, you do some push-ups, you lift some weights. This is something that we're able to do. And usually you want to build more muscle because you want to be able to swim farther or climb higher or maybe just look better. Evolution in general usually works as a just good enough metric. This is something that you end up learning if you get really deep into the biology, is it's not about being the pinnacle or the peak or the best. You're just the thing that didn't die. And we're in a position where things are dying very rapidly. And so this is a method of basically helping plants lift weights. And so,
Gabriel,
yeah.
Yeah, we have already some new folks on the gathering here.
Mm-hmm.
Would be nice to you talk about trees a little bit, because we know that trees are not only trees in this very narrow concept that the common folks have about trees. So speak a little bit about the complex systems that trees, the complexity of a tree itself and trees of a forest. Would it be nice?
I'm actually getting there. I'm kind of getting all the heavy science out of the way.
Okay.
And then don't worry, dude. I'm on it.
Okay, man. Go.
So this, like I said, this technology was borrowed from the lumber industry and the sugarcane industry, and because they were trying to just grow one tree as big and as fast as possible so that they could grow a forest of one type of tree as big and as fast as possible. And here with this original method, it was all about like these two genes, the PXY and the CLE genes. One of them organized the pieces, and one of them increased the number of pieces inside of the plant. It turns out, though, that this gene exists in like all the plants. So if they can do it with a pine tree, I can do it with a fern. And so it was very important that both of these genes are used, because if you increase the number of pieces, but you don't, the CLE is the organization, you just get garbage. And so the combination of increase in pieces plus organization gives you this structured system. That gene system is, well, it's not patented, but the ability to work with it is kind of restricted, in as much as that it's owned by large industries that are trying to protect their interests. So we started using another gene called SB-PACE, also found all over the plant kingdom. And SB-PACE, you may have seen it recently if you pay attention to science news, has been shown to make plants photosynthesize 40 times better, grow bigger, and also make them more drought and cold resistant. So it's kind of like the plant super gene. And that's the thing that we're working with now. And these, like I said, these genes exist in all the different types of plants. And so what we're doing is we're developing a system where we can test it in a variety of different things, and then see how they work together. The way that we do this is by using something called Agrobacterium. It is, again, a naturally occurring bacteria. I'm sure you've seen a tree that has these lumps on it. This type of thing is because of the infection. What we've done is we've removed the piece of the bacteria that causes the infection, and allows it to transfer genetic material without creating a virus, basically a bacterial infection. It just allows the genetic material to go in. And so
it's like a fungus. It's like a fungus.
It's a bacteria. It's a bacteria. It's a soil bacteria. It's literally everywhere. If you go outside and you pick up a handful of dirt, you will find Agrobacterium in it.
Okay.
The number of trees that have it is phenomenal. Every time you see one of those weird little lumps on a branch, that's Agrobacterium. It's everywhere. So the way that this works is you take your gene of interest and you put it into the bacteria, and then you take a leaf and you cut a piece out of the leaf, and then you put the bacteria in the leaf by soaking it. And then what you get with this is a plant that grows bigger. That is fundamentally how it works, and it's actually that easy as well. It's not really a very complicated system, because we're using biological methods. And the bacteria already know what to do. The plants already know how to grow. I don't know if you guys know this, but what we consider stem cells or pluripotent cells, most plants, all of their cells have the capability to revert to that state with hormone triggers. And hormones are a lot of how plants communicate. And so that's why you can take a leaf and you can dip it in rooting hormone and then stick it in the ground, and it'll start growing roots right out of the leaf, because any of the cells can become another cell if you communicate with them properly. And so I see a lot of the work that we're doing, especially with the hormone work, as not really is about talking with the plants, you know? So that method works pretty well. The new method that we're trying is actually, this is what a wheat seed looks like. And so you'll see that most of this seed, the endosperm and the hull, that's just food. There's just a very, very tiny part. And if you look close at a seed, you'll always see that weird little nub. That's the embryo. That's the actual, and it's just one cell. And so if we put the DNA into just that piece, when it splits, all of that DNA will be conserved, which means that every cell will also have the upregulation. because that's the DNA we're putting in, upregulation, not randomness. And this allows to have a plant where every cell in the plant is expressing the same thing equally. So if we were just doing plants, that would be still very unbalanced. This is a slide from a science paper, and it has to do with mycorrhiza networks and fungal networks. And so what you're looking at here is the different clusters of fungal networks that live with their host trees, and then also create this very complex system of both communication and resource sharing. So the other thing that we're doing is we're developing basically a library, a census of the species in different areas, because I have friends all over the world who are interested in this project right now. And so what we can do is we can, you know, not just make like a one-shot pill that you smack into something. You'll notice that these 3 maps, these node maps, look different. These are all from different regions of the planet. One is tropical, one is grassland, one is deciduous forest. And so
B, C, D, which is tropical? It's
the most right-hand one is tropical, and then the center one is deciduous, and then the first one is grassland. There's a key underneath for what all the different circles mean, but the little white circles are the plant networks, and then what you're getting, the blue circles are the pollinator networks, and then the red circles are the fungus networks, and so you'll see that there's a very complex system going on here. And we like to think about, when we're talking about reforestation or planting or stuff like that, we like to think about these systems, well, on our level. We're macro species, so we think about macro systems. We think about trees. It's like you put trees in, you put grasses in, you put, you know, lots of native species. Well, the most fundamentally important native species are fungi and bacteria. And so we deal with the large things because that's easy for us. That's how we work. We deal with big things. We are big things. But the most important parts of the world are bacterial. Like, we can't function without our gut bacteria. Forests can't function without healthy soil. And so by getting this census of species and being able to build a library, we can help basically make probiotics for the dirt.
Gabriel, how did these maps came mapped? How was the method? How was the way that we know this information? And this
well, so the way that it is, so a bunch of researchers went out to forests all over the world, and then they did this. They went around to the root systems of trees and plants in the forest, and they took cultures and they swabbed them onto dishes, and then you'll see there that there's a variety of different species here. The white fluffies are fungus, the circles are bacteria, and you'll notice that there's 2 different types of fungus. There's the cotton candy cloud, and then there's the white with black dots, and then there's actually a third one up here, which is like a cotton candy cloud with a yellow ring around it. And so each one of those is a separate species. And then the same thing here with the bacteria. You've got your brown ones, and then you've got a little white one there, and so all of these, and then the yellow ones, and so all of these were collected and mapped. They, you know, you basically just go out there and you stick a sampling device into the dirt, and then you rub it on some growth media so that you can see what they look like. And so that's the type of stuff that we're doing now, is we're trying to find out where all of these things are. The end goal of this project, and this is where it gets a little weird, the end goal of this project is to actually make something that people can use. For 2 years, I lived in Jacksonville, Florida. it's not that great. And the soil is completely destroyed. It used to be part of the Everglades. Now it's mostly concrete and sand. And even with mulching and composting for 2 years, I couldn't get like a tomato plant to grow in the ground. The native plants were doing okay, but they were also unbalanced because they had been so ravaged by what we had done there. And one of the key components to regenerating soil is getting bacteria and fungus. And so what I want to do is make a kit, which is basically like, imagine a 1 meter cube, and in it is native species, both plant and bacteria and fungus from your region. I give you the kit, you plant it using the Miyawaki method, and with the modifications that we've added, you should be able to grow, I mean, like I said, the Miyawaki method is 3 meters in 6 months is the baseline. So if you can make something that grows even faster, that would be amazing. And I know that it's a kind of an extreme concept, but we're kind of living in extreme times. And the concept that we can sit around for 20 years and wait for trees to grow doesn't really mesh well with the concept that we're capable of killing a tree in a day. They grow so much slower than we burn them down. And I see this as an opportunity to give them a leg up and maybe potentially deal with some of the issues that we've created. So that's what I'm doing right now.
It's amazing, man. It's really amazing. I have a ton of questions, but I certainly I don't want to overtake this P2P talk. So so people, let's give a turnaround to see if who have questions, who have doubts and perspectives and things that can aggregate what Gabriel was just sharing with us. I think that Marco is with us, Marco Zubieta, and certainly he's the guy that in the chat put two thumbs up. So he certainly will have something to share with us. But feel free, Jeremy, Mike, Rodrigo, Karen, Tias, Shana.
Hey, so what's like the timeline of the project right now, the working timeline?
Well, I've been working on it, trying to find the best methods to get all this set for about 2 years. And it's always been slow because people don't really pay for forests. They don't care so much. They're more than happy to pay for medicine, but or medicine development, but they don't really care about forest development in the same way. But now I'm looking at about 3 months out from a proof of concept. So I should have a proof of concept for the region that I'm currently living in 2 to 3 months.
Awesome.
Oh, Gabriel.
Yes.
I wonder if how can we produce that for seeds, and see if we can use the extension of the forest and the borders of the forests for increasing the healthy and the complexification of the forest. If you do around it and in the place that you have the border, and if it's possible to begin this. How can we begin this incrementation? I don't know the I love and I do uh, make forests grow, and with the permaculture and agroforest, and the forest that exists can be improved with it, and the borders too.
Um, so I'm going to try to repeat your question to see if I understand you correctly. Are you saying that this? Are you asking if this can be implemented in pre-existing forests and the edges of them as well?
Yes.
Okay. So in its current state, this modification only works with seeds because you need to get the change into the very core of the plant. If you did this modification to a fully grown plant, it would only affect the one area that you modified. So maybe you get like one big leaf. But depending on how you developed it, and this is one of the areas where it gets a little weird, depending on how you develop it, you can make this thing able to cross-pollinate. Though I'm going to go on record as saying that that's a theoretical modification, because making genetic modifications to plants that cross-pollinate with other plants is illegal like almost everywhere. So yes, it is possible, but it's also important to recognize that things need to be done incrementally. This is probably way more extreme than most permaculture people think about. But in terms of what is possible, this is actually just an incremental step moving forward to show that things can work. Because there's only so much that you can theorize. And if you just say, hey, this is wonderful, let's do it, and go crazy, well, that's usually how we get into trouble. So, stepwise is still the best way. But yes, in the long run, this could be a much larger type of thing.
Gabriel, this is asking concerns for cross-pollination, permaculture as a start.
I think this is actually just kind of taking notes here. But yes, so I personally don't have concerns about cross-pollination, but that's just because of both how I feel about the technology, but also my understanding of the technology. This is basically like inverse Monsanto world, where instead of taking this very powerful and amazing tool and using it to break things, we're trying to take this powerful and amazing tool and empower things that aren't even us technically, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah. Can you give us the status? You said that in some months ahead, you will be in a position to share this in a broader way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to understand a little bit the steps and see if we can make some bonds, some bridges. we can really make this an open source, a very open source,
right,
peer-to-peer thing to happen.
So the most important thing, I think, is to be able to address the concerns that people have. And a lot of the concerns that I've had when I've brought this topic up have to do with invasive species, with monocultures, with all of that kind of restrictive ways that we like to do agriculture. And so one of the best ways to deal with this is to start doing this census of the species, to have this collection of materials that are available for everyone so they can say, this, this is my home. This is what lives in my home. Which is why the first proof of concept that I'm doing is here in basically, with things collected from the forest around my house. And so that type of documentation is actually very, very useful. And I think it would help people feel a little more comfortable about utilizing the technology. Beyond that, it's really just a wait and see. Once we do the first testing, which is probably going to happen this week, it's going to take a couple of weeks to grow, and I can get some initial data. But like with all things science, you need to have more than an n equals 1. And so the next step will be to get collaborators who are willing to learn some of the fundamental skills. It's, like I said, it's a fairly easy process. And learn how to do this on their own so that they can duplicate it and show that it works. Because if I say that it works and nobody else can get it to work, then it's not very useful. And so that's the other part.
Gabriel.
Yes.
First of all, I want to congratulate, man. Every time that I hear your explanation about the project, it is better. I have a better understanding about what you want to achieve. But of course, there is a lot of concerns. For example, I shared the concerns that these remarks on the chat about that not only the trees are native, but also the fungi and the bacteria.
Yes.
So if there is a need of tweak, that is the first concern. The second is about the need to tweak the bacteria, which is something that could be do not quite easily, but it is something that it is possible to do. And I want to mention the amazing work of Angela Belcher. She wanted to engineer viruses that could be used to grow electronic circuits and ultimately batteries.
Right.
Okay, so
So
it's need to tweak also the fungi and bacteria in order to replicate globally.
So this is the short answer is actually no. Like genetically modifying bacteria is a constant struggle against failure. It's not that it's hard, it's that it doesn't last, because all of our genetic modification tools come from bacteria. Like there's no GMO technology that we've ever developed that doesn't already exist in nature. So all of those things have been happening for a very long time, and they're way better at it than we are. So like, I mean, even the modification of the trees, it's done with a bacteria. The CRISPR came from a bacteria. Everything that we do comes from bacteria, and bacteria replicate so fast. Like if you're trying to make a battery out of bacteria, you're going to lose because the bacteria don't care about you. So it's metabolically in their worst interest to help you. It doesn't do anything for them. They don't care that you want a battery or that you want to make insulin.
That's
or
not
any of
true.
that other stuff.
I'm all over with bacteria. My body, they care about me a lot.
No, you are the rock that they live on.
Yeah, I know, man.
But the viruses.
What about them?
Yeah, for example, what I talk about the Belcher, that they tweak the viruses in order to create batteries, right?
Right.
So
Oh,
it could be like,
viruses.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's a single organism, and it could be tweaked.
Right. Yeah, and that's a more complicated topic. To get back to the original concept that you were putting forth, though, you know, your average bacteria replicates about once every 25 minutes. Some are even faster, and so their ability to adjust to a system is far superior to ours. And the necessity of modifying bacteria to deal with these complex systems that we would be trying to put in place, they're going to do it better than we are, because we'll probably just mess it up. We'll put in something that's useless, and then the bacteria will cut it out, and then they'll borrow something from something else, and they'll use it themselves, and they'll do it. The bacteria are far superior genetic engineers than we are, so it's kind of silly to try to preload them when you know that they're just going to be just fine.
Jeremy put some questions here on the chat.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
So in this country, actually every country has its own specific, so the question is any government regulations about releasing genetically modified organisms. And there are a bunch, and they're different for every country. The EU and all of the countries inside of the EU are very restrictive. It's actually the work that I'm doing here in my lab is considered illegal in Germany and Austria. You can't modify any genes, or they'll throw you in jail and fine you a lot. Which doesn't really change anything, because you know genes will proliferate. Genes don't care about borders. So in the United States, the rules about what you can and can't do are largely connected to, I'm going to say, potential escape events and industry interests. So there are techniques that are illegal unless you work for a major company because they've put a patent on it, or they say, you know, this is our way of doing it, and it's illegal to do it otherwise. But like all things, there's loopholes around all of that. The other concern is about release, and the one thing that that comes to mind is how I used to go to University of Washington in Seattle, and for a while there, especially back in the late 90s, early 2000s, environmentalists would firebomb the plant labs, and the plant labs don't really look like labs. The way they're giant greenhouses that are growing, you know, thousands and thousands of little plants, so that they can see how they work. And so the project that I remember the most was aspen trees. And we don't really understand how, like I was saying before we got started, we actually don't understand a lot of how biology works. And so when we want to understand like how a gene works, what we do is we break the gene, and then we see what happens. And so you can break a gene in an aspen tree, and then it gets floppy. And you're like, that's the gene that makes it not floppy. And this is how actually most of our understanding of all biology works. It's like, well, what happens if you remove it? Oh, wow, that's important.
Gabriel, what's your take on Lynn Margulies' autopoietic thesis, or way of seeing biology?
Can you give me a
Do you know Lee Margulis? Have you?
Not enough to summarize.
Yeah. So, well, she basically says that nature has its own way to regulate life itself, and most organisms. She's not talking in a genetic level. She's talking in an organism level. Most organisms have ways to interact that are not self-driven. They are driven by a network of organisms. So these organisms, as a whole, they regulate life without knowing they're regulating life. So that will put it in the in a very nutshell way, the way she thinks about it.
Biology is extremely self-driven. Like, it's impossible to get away. It's all about the proliferation of the gene. But being self-driven and being able to cooperate are not mutually exclusive. And so just because you see a complex system that is working off of each other, it doesn't mean that each thing isn't self-driven. Like, when an oak tree just like basically carpet bombs everything around it with acorns, it's not because it's trying to help a squirrel. It's because it's trying to make as many trees as possible. And that's really, you know, when a rabbit has like 40 babies, it's not because they're trying to feed the foxes. Like, environmental systems self-regulate, but they self-regulate because they're all trying to be as self-driven as possible, which is a very strange concept for us because we don't really do things that way. But another thing to consider is that this concept only works in a very kind of, well, reductionist kind of view. There are a lot of species which we consider keystone species that are so extremely important that an entire regulation system will collapse if you remove them. And we've done a particularly wonderful job lately of doing stuff like that. And so there are systems that are in a such unbalanced state that they are no longer able to regulate. I think, you know, even like when you talk about carbon capture and, you know, averting climate change and stuff like that, people will talk about, okay, well, even if we stopped, even if human beings like cease to exist immediately right now, the ramifications of what we've done are so intense that we're still, this would not halt the extinction event that we're already in the middle of.
You see, Gabriel, the second thing that she said to sustain her take on life, on biology in this planet, I put in the chat here. It's the concept of symbiogenesis.
Yeah, this is like kind of this is the most accepted theory right now, actually. Yeah, but that doesn't. But again, like it's a constant struggle that biologists try to work with, where you have to not anthropomorphize stuff. And so collaboration on a cellular level is not the same thing as collaboration on a macro level. Because once you get down to the cellular level, you're basically dealing with I mean, it's chemistry. And chemistry has no intent. It works because it works. If it's all about molecules kind of floating in liquid and smacking into each other. And so like being a symbiote on a cellular level is not the same thing as being a symbiote on a macro level, is not the same thing as being a symbiote in a social level. The words definitely mean different things. And so I think it's really important. It's good that you brought this up because it's so easy to take the words that we use over here in our world and apply them to a different one, and we define things differently.
Gabriel,
Would you say that what you're just sharing with us is the pragmatic view of biology itself? Not see the impression that I have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriel, is that some biologists and crossover disciplines that relates with biology, they have this holistic way of looking nature itself in life, but they forget about all this selfishness that you're talking about. So, and some guys are more pragmatic and have a different view about it. Am I wrong in this take?
Hello.
Hello.
Come on, Mike. Yeah, Mike, feel free.
Yeah. So again, we're still in a position where we're mixing terms here, because like you use the word pragmatic and holistic, which is generally how we talk about holistic systems as being very pragmatic systems. And when you're dealing with human beings, selfish systems are not pragmatic. But in biology, like these concepts are flipped. Like pragmatic systems and selfish systems have extreme overlap. You know, this is why, you know, because it's about the gene. It's not about the individualism, and so it's the selfish gene as opposed to the selfish individual. And so when you're sacrificing yourself, this isn't because it is actually a selfish act. Like again, the terms get all twisted up, and this is one of the reasons that it's so difficult for our different sides to meet, is because, you know, we look at how selfish people can be, and then you hear a biologist being like, nature is inherently selfish, and they're like, no, it's not. Look at how great nature is. Look at how big of a jerk we are. Like, it doesn't mean the same thing, though.
Well, I ask it on purpose.
Sorry.
Because this confusion exists.
Hang on.
Yeah, Mike. Go.
Can I ask something that biologists?
Yeah, okay.
What do you know about the term consociation?
Consociation. I have never heard this term, but I'm also really bad with words.
Can you please do a quick search and find the term consociation? In biology, but it goes into the economics and into the social thing. But I'll explain a little bit more of that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so yes, so it's a political system formed by the cooperation of different, especially antagonistic social groups on the basis of shared powers. So this would be like the 1%, for instance.
Exactly, and it applies to biology as well. Like there's a scientific, a more scientific description of what consociation is in biology, but it resembles European Union, and it was developed in the 1600s when federation ideals were, being created.
Right. So one thing to note here is that the concept of consociation implies intent, that there's an intent of collaboration despite being antagonistic. And
no, the intent is to share power.
Right, but that's the thing. There is no intent to share power in biology.
It's survival.
It's survival. And here's the thing. It's like everything that is alive now is because it ate, interbred or just straight up killed everything else that already existed. Like, there is no intent, like, even if you look at a predator-prey dynamics, and there's a whole system of math for talking about that, these systems aren't, you know, the wolf doesn't hunt only as much as it needs because it's trying to develop a dynamic with an antagonistic system. It's just how they do. There's no, the concept of intent is so much different on a biological level on that type of system that, again, it's really foreign to people. And so, yeah, this concept is interesting, but it's also slightly flawed because it implies collaboration. And even when you have, like, there's less, the concepts of collaboration, especially between antagonistic systems that we see in human society, are not, they're just not structured the same. We actually do things really differently than most biological systems when it comes to our social organization.
We're talking about systemic change of complex systems, you know?
Okay.
So I'm bringing it up
Gabriel,
in terms.
it appears that it is needed in-depth approach and in-depth research about the endosymbiosis and all the Lee Margulis and the next researchers that follow his stroke, because it is both. It is, you know, situations in which there is competition, but situations in where there is collaboration. So nature behaves like that, and it is needed to understand very well both situation when occurs and the laws that is underlying that situation.
Okay, I'm gonna try one more time
First of all,
let me just take this concept one more time so that when we continue with this conversation, we're all using the same conceptual framework and the same language and the same definitions so that we're not using the same words and getting confused, okay?
Okay.
All right, so lichen. Everyone knows lichen, right? The moss fungus symbiote.
Yeah.
Lives on rocks. Very important, like one of the most powerful, important things on the planet. So lichen aren't lichen because they decided to collaborate. Lichen are lichen because two things figured out, and even the word figured out, two things on a chemical level worked together, and the other things that didn't died. But there was no intent to collaborate. It was just that they happened to be in the same place at the same time, and everything else that didn't died, and probably even some of their offspring also didn't work, and then those things died. It's not about collaboration the way that we see it. It's not about symbiosis the way that we see it. It's about, well, why are wolves the way that wolves are? Well, because anything that was a wolf that didn't act like a wolf died. And that's not a conscious choice. That's just you managed to not be dead, and so you passed on your genes. It's a very fundamentally different concept.
But the scientific method in social systems is that knowledge is transmitted between the humanity, you know, peer to peer.
Yeah, and the social systems have gone on record in the last year acknowledging that social sciences don't use the scientific method. I mean,
yes, that's an issue, like, because it has to be, is addressed by the corporations, which is a similar system to a consociation. A consociation is a close association or fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about symbiosis. I mean,
Well, I think
so they're basically basic human needs, you know, biological needs that need to be satisfied by itself. This is human nature, but
see, that's
the
point,
the point we're in right now, psychoanalytically, is that it's about the human condition, that we have transcended, in a sense, our biology. We have depression, we have suicide,
animals get depressed.
obesity. Yes,
animals get suicide. They get obese. Animals get cancer. The narrative that things are human nature and somehow unique, and the narrative that corporate structures and the way that we deal with things socially is connected to nature, like, is part of the way that we justify doing really bad things to each other. We're like, oh, but you know, this is how it works in nature. And that's just not the case at all. You know, like,
That's
if you want to
called
use human,
but you said there is no intent, so there has to be some sort of malevolence or trust or threat or benevolence that we can measure chemically, and like especially we can see, you know, reward centers,
Sure.
like
yeah, and
lighting
the
up.
biggest reward center is you manage not to die. It's a huge reward center. That's how most of nature works. Eating, fucking, sleeping, not dying. That's it. Those are our reward centers. The rest of these reward centers are things that have tapped into that, and they make you feel good about stuff. But they're totally hijacking, like, you know,
The tribal
supporting corporate interests is not actually natural. Corporations aren't like this. This is we're getting into the concepts of meritocracy here. Like yeah, because it works, it must be the best thing.
I mean, if we're looking at the evolution of societies from hunters and gatherers into interplanetary society, how do you see the evolution of biological systems?
I mean, exploitation of systems, but I mean, that's every biological thing. But like, again,
Gabriel, you see,
it just doesn't, it just doesn't translate over. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the biological concept of malevolence, and that's not a thing.
Gabriel, there's a lot of noise about concepts. You see, in between areas of studies, in between way of viewing life, right? In a more reductionist way or a more holistic way. What I'm saying is, this type of talk that we're having here is very interesting and necessary, because we really need to understand ourselves when we talk about these concepts. And I know that you, as a biologist, as someone that is deep in the field and doing very interesting and very important and very interesting things, they're very welcome. You see. But this type of noise, I think that is the challenge. You see, is a challenge to make ourselves understand and build the bridges that you yourself are looking for.
So, like on that concept, to make it more accessible, has anyone read the book Anti-Fragile?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah, right? Same guy who did Black Swan.
Yep.
Yeah. And so this is like this is really great because I've been to a lot of entrepreneurial conferences and places where people are talking about collaboration and group building and developing organizations and making money, of course, because, you know, that's the end goal, right? And they love to talk about the book Anti-Fragile. And the summary of the book Anti-Fragile is take a year of biology courses. It's biology for business majors. The concept of anti-fragility exists way more robustly than anything that could be broken down in that book. I had to force myself to read it because it was so boring. Because there's nothing there that doesn't already exist. It's just that somebody had to translate it into language that people with MBAs understood. And I find that very interesting. And I think, Karen, you mentioned that you had kind of struggled and avoided the science classes because well, for a variety of reasons. And I know a lot of people in science that have struggled and avoided the arts because you get so comfortable with one tool set, and then, but by learning these other things, we're able to translate across. And I think that that's one of the things that I've been trying to do so much is to, you know, find that noisy middle where your things and my things can interact.
I totally agree. It's language, it's communication.
Yeah, Gabriel, it would be nice to know, man, how we can evolve this ants project all over around, and what kind of tools you already you and the guys that you or the partner you're doing this.
All right, yeah.
What you guys already have in hands that you can already share to
okay.
Make this
so, wow, I should have and so I'm in my laboratory right now. I'm rebuilding the laboratory because I had to move again. So it's kind of a disaster area, but all of my biologicals are in the fridge, which is
you could take us a tour around to see your yeah.
No, because it's a disaster area right now.
Well, it's okay, man. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like literally not organized. But if we're talking about what it is that like, if you want to learn how to do the biology is actually fairly simple. And a lot of it is the same type of techniques that you would use for cleaning your bathroom or cooking dinner for a friend, just smaller. And so it gets a little weird because you can't always see what you're doing. So you have to actually be even more precise with your techniques because I can't see a single bacteria, you know? So, I mean, this is actually more of a, I think, maybe an email chain type of thing, because I'm sure that there are some people that are interested in this concept of the census of the species so that we can have a better understanding of what it is that lives around us. And then some people want to do because one of the beauties of this project is that it has so many different pieces that come together. You've got people that are going out and doing census of the species. You've got people that are doing bacterial work. You've got people that are doing planting and that's the macro work. Some people just want to put their hands in the dirt, you know, census with a C, dice. You know, and then there's the planting and the caring for the plants. And I love to do, hang on a second, census. Like when you collate all of the, yes. And I love to do all of these things. I love to go out and collect things. I have a terrible, wonderful habit of finding cool plants and then bringing them home. When I'm walking in the forest or moss, sometimes I'm just like, plants everywhere.
Do you have some photos from the field of you collecting?
Oh yeah, they're all planted in the back. I just moved into this house in May, so just a few months ago, and we're actually getting rid of the entire backyard, and we're going to replant it with a native prairie, which is kind of the regional original native thing that was here, half prairie, half wetland. So they're all already outside in the ground. And then you know, there's people who work with plant biology, there's people who work with bacterial biology, and then there's the gardeners and the caretakers, and all of this coming together. You know, it's an arc, it's a narrative arc. It all has to come together, and all of our different abilities need to come together. So there's no one particular thing that I could say, hey, this is what you need to do. I can just give an outline, and then if somebody's interested, they can talk to me and I can give them more structure. But if you wanted me to explain every single piece of the process, it would take days. So it's better to just break it into pieces and everyone come in as they want.
This presentation that you gave us, you share with us here, is it open source? Is it open to us to see?
Sure. I mean, it's just a bunch of pictures. I made sure that every picture was sourced from something that was Creative Commonsly licensed. Of course, there weren't a lot of words for most of it, and it's just pictures. I'm not a big fan of slides with words, but sometimes you have to do it when you're referencing papers. But I'm also going to be doing a talk about this in August at a conference, so that'll be streaming. We're trying to make a poster about this. And then I have like a slide deck from when I tried to convince someone to support this, and there's a bunch of other material. And of course, all the research papers for those of you who know how to read research papers or want to learn how to read research papers, those are also available. And yeah, it's all,
Gabriel,
it's all there.
Could you put this presentation in the chat for the people to take a look?
Yeah, it's just my Google Drive. So just...
Yeah. And people, we're already towards the ending of this really interesting P2P talks with Gabriel. I love the noise, okay? I think this noise is very important because we need to understand ourselves as a species, and we need to understand the planet that we live in, right? We need to understand we see, not only understand, but understand that without this planet, we can't live, right? Without this planet and all the life that is in this planet, we can't live. We can't exist as a species too. So that's very important. And but I think that all the things that you shared today with us, this project and things like that, in my point of view, in my perspective, they have a conversational points. They have conversational points, talking points that can be how I say, that can be viewed by others that are not biologists or that are not related to this field of study, this field of investigation, and see this as inspiration for the work they themselves are doing. You see, you see, Gabriel, I see the things that go more even not only around the topic that we explored today here, but in between all the things that are happening now, and in the sense of regeneration, in the sense of getting the grasp of what is being a species, a social organism in the midst of all this complexity that nature is in this planet. So it's very, for me, it's very mindful, and I think for Shanna too. I might be, I don't know, for Shanna, for Jeremy, for Karen, for Marco, Tis. Well, folks, if you want to add something, add it now, because we are already going to the end of this P2P Talks.
I think I want to add a little bit, Gabriel. Would you think that it could be useful, let's say, to do some research on some promissory species like moringa, for example, which is a tree that grows so fast?
Oh yeah, I know the
Right?
moringa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it grows so fast, and you know, it is a tree that fits all the situation, the current disaster that we are dealing with, because it allows the recovery of the soil and it don't need too much water, for example. So if we do some research on site about a moringa tree and looking for the whole ecosystem in which they grow so fast and in the way that they you know, interact with their ecosystem, which comprise the soil, the bacteria, the fungi. You know, do you think that case studies like that around promissory species could help your work to get more advanced?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's always about all of the tiny pieces coming together. It's not always about, you know, one big thing. And yeah, I actually, so I grew moringa when I was in Florida. It was like one of the only things I could grow. And I was very interested in how it was handling living there. And I mean, and again, that comes like, that's a whole ecosystem of a project. Like, you can take the moringa, you can sequence it. The first thing I would do is I would probably look for the SP pace. Honestly, I bet it has upregulated SP pace or multiple copies of the gene. But, you know, so you can look for stuff. You can do sequencing there. You can see what already exists. Maybe it's on a genetic level in the plant itself. But then you can also take samples of the roots and you can culture them, like I showed in that slide that had all the different little bacteria and fungus. And you can look at the difference between the root and the place next to the root and be like, oh, there is something here. It lives on the roots. And because there's lots of plants that do like nitrogen fixing that live on the roots of other plants, or like lots of bacteria and fungus that do that. And so there's a whole, I mean, any one of these things can turn into a lifetime of exploration. And all of those things can be stacked on top of each other to build something more. And it allows it allows a situation where if you get really, really excited about moringa, just go full moringa. And then, you know, something that you learn can be used by someone else. I mean, that's how scientific research is supposed to work.
Talking about scientific research, do you think that how do you view this open science thing that's mostly related to big data? Not do you view it in a good way? I think that it has been useful, not usual, useful.
Data's important in how you use it. I mean, we have a lot of it, and the problem is how we choose to look at it. If you're looking for something, like how we approach big data and how we approach scientific research are a little bit different, because we trawl big data, we hunt big data. And properly done, science doesn't look for results. Science looks for patterns. And so we have been doing that better with big data, but we're also able to hunt results with big data, and it allows us to just build stories about whatever. when you have like 80 billion data points, you can cherry pick those and make whatever you want. And so I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just we need to be mindful about how we use it and make sure that we're letting the data show us the picture as opposed to trying to find the picture in the data. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it doesn't have to make any sense. Just to understand your perspective. And another question is, how do you view people that are working with artificial intelligence and general artificial intelligence, and the relations between this rising artificial intelligence that we are seeing now, that's very techy. It's very with the complexity of the biosystem of the planet, the interfaces. Do you see good interfaces like Marco is doing with Green Fab Labs?
Yeah, so the work that Marco is doing is very cool, and I think it's good and it's functional because on a macro scale it's still compartmentalized. We have a big problem with forcing our narrative on things, and so software moves towards optimization, but optimization is not necessarily how biological systems work. And so if you try to optimize a system, there's a lot of different ways that you can break it. You know, this is why you know, modern agriculture is all weird, monoculture, broken type of stuff. And if you add more complexity through artificial intelligence, I say more power to you. But at the same time, you have to understand that it comes from a substrate where you are the seed. And so you are still putting in the primary concept of what optimization means. And if you're trying to do that, you're going to get weird results.
Yeah, I think that Marco put it in a very, very interesting way here. We need to get rid of the glamorous and bucolic view of life. There's collaboration, but also antagonism. There is sublime interactions and harmony, but also parasitism and violence. How to use the symbiotic mutualist patterns to solve current imbalance. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I am, anyone who's interacted with me online or in person knows that I am very pro antagonism. I think conflict is how systems develop. Without stressors, you'll just be the same thing indefinitely. That goes for software, that goes for people, that goes for plants. So
Yeah, really, Gabriel, because I am aligned with you and Marco too in that, because I understand that conflicts are very welcome, not wars, but conflicts, and it makes us better understand ourselves and better co-create things together. So I'm aligned with that too.
I'm going to work backwards through the comments, and I'm going to, because it seems like people are actually trying to say stuff now. So for Gates, EU regulation is not antagonistic to me for two reasons. One, because I don't live in the EU, though I have friends who do. But the bonus is that they come and stay at my house when they want to do work, and so it works out. If the EU doesn't want to do genetic engineering work, they're just going to lose their genetic engineers. The other one is that regulations are very, very rigid, and you can always find loopholes. And then let's see, developing a solid narrative, because we can do really good work, but if we get antagonized by companies in the public, we can get shut down really quick. I mostly agree with you, Jeremy, except the whole concept of being shut down implies that I am working for someone.
I mean, not necessarily. If they put in regulations, and with like the FDA guidelines on genetically modified animals, right?
Did not change a single thing. Absolutely didn't. I know why they put in that, I mean, David Ishii's a friend of mine. I know all about that. It didn't change a single thing. The biggest hiccup was that he wasted like a whole week talking about it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Final question
Uh-huh.
of me.
Okay.
Well, if you know, going to AI is complex, and it is something that, well, people could say that is crazy because you need a lot of resources on, you know, digging on AI, things like that. But I think it's about daring, and because we need a way of approach the complex of current situation, the complexity of current situation. We need not only to deal with AI, but also with the current scenario about cryptocurrencies or blockchain. So regarding the issue that you talked today, why about, for example, to buy a piece of forest and every 6 months, the smart contract could interact with a satellite imagery system to get information about the forest. Then the program could determine how much wood could be sold without diminishing the tree population too much. The possibility of create a function that makes it possible for the system to buy additional properties and choose to expand. So the forest own themselves and performs an ongoing analysis of its resources and can sell and buy back its own wood using smart contracts and the dynamic data sets, for example. So it is something that could be a foresight about how could we evolve as a species and how could we enable a species like animals or forest in order to preserve itself.
All right. So step one, blockchain and Bitcoin are just capitalism with more steps. Everyone knows this. Two, the forest doesn't technically own itself because basically what you said is we are so terrible at interacting with the world that we need to develop a system of capitalism that makes it so that trees can sell themselves. And that sounds really weird. Like, basically, I mean, this isn't fixing any problems. This is just adding more complexity to the current problem. And that's not necessarily a solution at all. I like the idea. I like the idea conceptually. It makes me feel good. But at the end of the day, you know, you're talking about a piece of software that is made by a human, owned by a human, ran on human servers, that is, in theory, representing a forest that is buying itself and then can, in theory, sell pieces of itself to buy other forests. And while that is like very cool conceptually, it's also like very weird and speaks to how like fundamentally inundated we are with capitalism, to the point where we're like, the only way we're going to stop burning things down is if we get that forest a lawyer and some blockchain and, you know, make it a citizen. It's like, all right, or we could just stop being assholes. You're just taking capitalism and you're superimposing it on the world. That doesn't make it better. Just means more capitalism. It hasn't really worked out very well for us. I mean, 99% of us. I mean, do you understand why it doesn't jive with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you see, not all the blockchains are related to Bitcoin for a starter, and
Well,
has
blockchain in
other
general.
technologies like Holochain that has a better mutualist and is not driven by capital. It's not driven by capitalism by itself. But okay, you made your point, Gabriel. I understand it, and Marco made his point too. So it's nice. It's nice to have antagonists and different perspectives, guys. You see, this is nice. This we're not trying to form here a homogenic way of thinking. Okay, this heterogenic way of interacting is very interesting. It's because it's necessary for us as a species to understand the other's perspective, even if the other's perspective doesn't relate with us, right? And so for me, it's okay. It's really okay. And people, we're really going to the finals here. So if you want to make some remarks or some questions, and or just share your thoughts, feel free.
All right, well, it sounds like we're pretty wrapped up then.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. The silence is a way to. Well, Jeremy is really loud in a good sense here in the chat. How about promoting edible tree species as like a public service, a la John and Appleseed? And thank you everyone for their presence. This value is not equal to price. Yes, is different things. I agree with you on that. This and okay. Anyone? Shana? Shana, could you just say that instead of me reading the chat?
How can we transparently model at whatever level more clearly in such a way to reveal the hidden nature and dynamics in what Gabriel and Marco just shared? I think that's a question for everyone, really.
Yeah, it really is. I mean,
yeah.
Not even the holochain is totally clear about the code. I mean, there is a need to understand in a better way how the whole thing about blockchain works. And we are in a process of learning about it. I have no, we have still not some big conclusions about that. But main concerns is about the way the business as usual, as well be remarked by Gabriel. We don't need any more business as usual, and also it is a needed about energy. It's about, for example, Bitcoin is demanding a lot of energy, and there is a lot of waste. So we need to understand that if we want a different monetary system or economical system, we need to create one that could be smart. And if we, create value, but at the same time destroy the planet, provoke a lot of emissions in the way that Bitcoin are doing. So it is not so smart, isn't it? So that is two guidelines to research how to make how to make it more more clear, a more transparent model. That there is interesting works, and I will share it in the group, but it is still on its infancy, I think.
So my answer to this is is that we would have to do a much more thorough and, I'm going to even say, non-human accounting than we have ever done for the way things work. I had a friend who he made a tiny home out of a bus, but it wasn't fully solar yet. He was putting in an electrical engine, but it's still running on gas, and they hadn't fixed their shower. They hadn't they were building the tiny home. It wasn't complete, but it was beautiful and amazing, and it's very cool. And it was like a little short bus that they turned into a tiny home. And he was talking about how this made him more self-sufficient. And he's like, especially once I get the solar panels and the battery system set up. And I'm like, you're parked on the street in front of my house, using my shower, installing batteries that were mined in another country, using solar panels that are made out of rare earth materials, blogging about it on Instagram with a phone that was probably built by children. And, you know, we would have to take a full and thorough accounting. And I don't think any of us are actually ready for that. You know, when somebody says, yeah, I live in a mini home that, you know, that's a bus. And it's like, well, then you rely on the infrastructure of the road, you rely on the infrastructure of the gas system, you still support corporate oil if you're living in a freaking van, you know, like all of these things. And so, you know, if you want to transparently model the dynamics of that type of thing that I'm talking about, you'd have to acknowledge, like, we're having this conversation on tiny chunks of material that were mined on the other side of the planet. You know, and you want to talk about conflict diamonds, like this is a freaking conflict computer, right? My cell phone. And I don't know if we're ready for that accounting, but that's how you would do it. You would go, okay, where does everything come from? How is your infrastructure developed? I know a lot of people that talk about like distributed systems and like distributed solar grids, and they're like, hey, yeah, we're going to set up solar, and then, you know, you use the blockchain to keep track of how much energy you have, and you can trade it with your neighbors, and that way it's distributed. And I'm like, how are you going to move the electricity from your house to their house? And it's on the pre-existing electrical grid. And so if you say you're a distributed system, but you're actually already using the pre-existing electrical grid, you need to acknowledge that the pre-existing infrastructure is part of the system that got you there. And then you have to do accounting for that. So you can't say you hate the electrical company and then use their wires. You know, you can't say that you hate child labor and use a phone if you're going to be 100% honest. I guess we all have like limits, but I don't think anyone wants to look at that model, Shanna.
Perhaps it's time. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand you, Gabriel, and in that sense, all of my life, I always has this coherent look to understand that if I really want to reestablish a new way of being in society or being with others, I have to be coherent in my way of living, right? And in that sense, I try to hack things, right? I try to hack the infrastructure that exists. So I try to generate the energy with people around myself, and with nature provides us, and with all the knowledge that I can grapple, I can grasp and understand. I try to make the things in a way that people can access at all times, and I try to use technologies that are more local, made local, and put local, and for others too, not corporate technologies. This account here on Zoom, that's a corporate, it's an organization, is a corporate organization. It's a collective account. So there's hundreds of people that uses this channel. So I try to put it's a transition thing. It's not a fundamental thing. It's a transition.
Yeah.
But
Oh, no, absolutely. But, and that's what I'm saying.
It's a way to account things, you see? It's a way to account things. It's not something that whoa, man, it's very beautiful to see the site here, you see? I'm not talking about Burning Man, okay? I'm not talking about going to the desert and burning the things. I'm talking about doing things really right here, right now, with the folks around. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I was just, I was just replying to the question. I'm not like, and that's the thing, it's like, when I say stuff like this, the people who know me the best, they know that it's not like I'm not calling anyone out, because here I am, also using a computer in a house, right? Like this paint, I know where that paint came from actually, and it's terrible. It's more about being able to honestly acknowledge how things are going on. You know, it shouldn't be about shame. It shouldn't be about calling out. It shouldn't be about saying like that we're bad. We're all bad. So we're all bad together. It's more about being able to honestly address the situation. You can't fix things if you don't look at them directly. And there are so many things that we are afraid to look at directly because of how it makes us feel. And I really think that we are at a point where it's time to take those hits. You know, it will hurt, but the alternative is to continue feeling good and not being honest.
I think that's a high point to end this P2P talk. But as Rodrigo just kicked in, he had some internet issues, so he's sinking again. If Rodrigo wants to put some words and tease or carrying, Jeremy, and we can wrap up this thing.
Well, it was very good talking with all of you. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. And I'm very easy to get a hold of. You can find me everywhere. And my email is just my email, my name @gmail. So if anyone wants to talk with me, or if they want to participate, or if they just want to choose some ideas over, you can always just reach out to me. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Okay, let's do that. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, the next P2P talk will be with Michelle Bowens and the end of July. Okay, so be aware. Okay, bye-bye, people.
Bye.
Thanks, Gabriel. Very nice, man. Very nice.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. See you.
See you. Let's go.